I get it, there's a ton of cameras that look flawless on a product page, then you bring them home and they feel like they belong in a museum instead of a live set. You start to wonder whether you wasted time and money before you even hit record, and that hesitation can make you skip a purchase altogether. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. That's why I'm taking a hard look at the Blackmagic Design Studio Camera 4K Plus G2, the kind of gear that promises broadcast-grade performance but can be a nightmare if it doesn't live up to the hype. First off, the biggest thing that separates a true studio camera from a consumer camcorder is how it handles the workflow you actually use day to day. In a live production environment, you need a camera that you can drop into a switcher, have the picture stay consistent, and not spend half the show chasing menus. Blackmagic has built this model around SDI and HDMI outputs that lock into most broadcast switchers without a translator. When I ran it through a typical ATEM Mini Pro setup, the signal was clean, the color space stayed true, and there was zero lag when I switched between two of these units. That's the kind of reliability you need when you're cutting a live concert or a multi-camera talk show. Ease of use is a mixed bag. The physical controls are laid out like a traditional broadcast camera, dedicated iris, gain, and focus rings, so anyone who's ever touched a professional cam knows where to start. The menu system, however, lives inside a web-based interface that you access via a laptop or tablet on the same network. On the one hand, that means you can tweak advanced settings without digging into a cramped on-camera screen, but on the other hand it adds a layer of friction. In a fast-paced environment, you have to make sure your network is rock solid. A dropped Wi-Fi connection can temporarily lock you out of the menus, which is why many crews pair the camera with a dedicated Ethernet link for stability. Autofocus confidence is where the G2 really steps up compared to older Blackmagic models. The camera uses a contrast detect algorithm that's been tuned for the 4K sensor, and in practice it tracks a presenter moving within a 3-meter radius with minimal hunting. In a rehearsal for a news segment, the subject walked from a desk to a standing position while I kept the camera on auto, and the focus stayed locked without any visible shift. That said, the system isn't as aggressive as the Phase Detect AF you'll find in high-end mirrorless cameras, so if you need rapid focus pulls on fast-moving sports, you'll still want to go manual or use a lens with built-in focus motors. Low light behavior is a critical question for anyone who does live production in venues that don't have perfect lighting. The 4K sensor is a Super 35-sized CMOS that handles ISO up to 12,800 with a clean signal, and the dynamic range stays above 13 stops. In a dimly lit jazz club I tested it, the camera produced usable footage at 560 lux without throwing up noise that needed heavy post-processing. It's not a miracle night vision unit, but for most stage lighting scenarios you'll get a usable image without having to add a flood of extra light. Stabilization, or the lack thereof, is something you have to consider. The Studio Camera 4K Plus G2 is a shoulder-mounted rig, not a handheld gimbal. It doesn't have any in-body image stabilization, so you're relying on the rig's balance and any external stabilization accessories you attach. For a static studio environment with a tripod or a Steadicam, that's fine. If you tried to use it for run-and-gun documentaries, the footage would be shaky unless you added a separate stabilizer. That's why the camera feels most at home on a set where it can stay locked to a mount. Lens ecosystem is surprisingly flexible for a camera aimed at broadcast. The G2 uses a standard EF mount, meaning you can pull from the massive library of Canon lenses, from cheap 2470mm kits to high-end cinema primes. I tested a 24,105mm f/4L lens and a 50mm t2.9 cinema lens, and both performed as expected, no crop factor surprises, and the camera's color science handled the lens's different renderings without a hitch. If you already own a set of EF lenses, you'll appreciate that you don't need adapters or a whole new glass collection. Battery confidence often trips up people who are used to camcorders that run for hours on a single AA pack. The G2 uses a full-size Sony NPF 970 battery, which gives roughly 90 minutes of continuous shooting at 4K 30 frames per second. In a live broadcast that runs for 2 hours, you'll need a hot swap battery solution or a power and cage rig. Blackmagic does provide a DC input that you can feed from an external power supply, which is the typical workflow for a studio environment. If you're planning to shoot a short web series with a few takes, the internal battery will be fine. For anything longer than a half hour, you